After watching one battle after another, I noticed something about the way they use practical lights. Whether it's a lamp in the living room, fluorescent fixture in a grocery store, or a neon-lit phone booth, the practicals aren't just decorating the frame. They're often driving the entire exposure strategy. They're building the image around the practicals. In this video, I'll show you how to use exposure to shape practical lighting by lowering the environment around it, giving you greater control over the mood, depth, and visual hierarchy of your image. Whether you're shooting narrative film, documentaries, interviews, corporate videos, commercials, or even YouTube content, these principles can help you create more cinematic images using the practicals and windows already available on location. Let's dive right in. One Battle After Another is directed by Paul Thomas Anderson and photographed by Michael Bowman, featuring an incredible cast, including Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, Tiana Taylor, and Benicio del Toro, just to name a few. Well, while watching the film, I just kept noticing a pattern in how they use practical lighting. By lowering the overall exposure level, exposing for the practicals, balancing the color temperature, and selectively bringing back key areas of the frame, they're able to amplify the impact of practicals and use them to shape the mood of a scene. Let me show you what I mean. When you look at this behind the scene shot of one of the scene of One Battle After Another, you right away notice those practicals are very, very bright. And those are not your typical light fixtures. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but when I turn on a lamp in my living room, it doesn't look like that. And that's simply because they were able to replace those light bulbs with something that's a lot more powerful in order to augment the effect of practical lighting. But if you look at the actual scene, it's really how low the rest of the scene is that makes this practical stand out this much. But when you don't have control over that lamp, the only way to make that lamp stand out and have an effect, have an impact on the overall mood of your image is by lowering all the levels in the scene. And that way, that bright point become even brighter because you made everything else look darker. In this scene, they use the exact same strategy where we have the practical in the middle. Look at the levels all around in the frame. Everything is lowered down in order to then make that practical look even brighter. And then they place strategic lights in order to control levels on the talent, right? The other interesting thing in this particular frame is the color temperature, because now you have mixed color temperature between the window and the practical. And they use that at their advantage to, again, drive the mood and the tone of the image. In this scene, we can see the same table, the same practical that we just looked at. And now we can really see the effect of white balance, of color temperature, because it's obvious to me that they adjusted their color temperature, their white balance on the camera to bring out some of the warmer tone in the scene to make this practical even warmer. And we can see that because outside it's starting to look a little bluish. And I think it plays the contrast between the blue and the orange, make the inside of the house feel even warmer than it probably is. Another example in this film that I thought was very interesting is this scene in by the phone booth. If I'm shooting this particular scene, I'm exposing for that phone booth. I'm exposing for this light. And I don't care if this blows out, right? And it's a little bit blow out. Those are the neon lights in the window. That's totally okay if those are clipping. What I want is I want this light, the phone neon light, to really be the focal point. And then I can use selective lighting to bring levels here. So how can we use the same approach, the same technique to help improve how we use practicals in our daily kind of work? And I wanted to first start with an example of when we have no control. So I shot a bunch of different scenarios in my kitchen yesterday, but let's start with if you don't have control over the window and over the practical. So in this example, the light bulb that's up above the sink is just a regular light bulb. I had no idea what was in there. And so it turned out that it's a 5,000 Kelvin light bulb. So it's a very blue light bulb. I do have one light that I'm bouncing off the ceiling to just bring levels, which is what I would typically do in this kind of an environment, is to raise the levels to try to compensate a little bit for the window and try to expose the subject. If we look at the camera settings, we can see that I'm shooting wide open at f1.2. I'm shooting in native ISO of 800. My shutter is 1/60th of a second. And most importantly, I have an ND of 1/16th. If you guys have ever seen any of my videos on lighting, I always put some ND in my on camera so that I can quickly adjust up or down depending on what's going on. If I'm changing location, or if, like in this case, there's a window that I don't control. If, for example, a cloud comes in, I can just remove some ND and raise the levels, and then the contrast will stay the same. So that's kind of the base of that particular setting. Now, if I turn on the practical light, you can see that it has almost no effect whatsoever on the picture. It adds a little bit of levels maybe right underneath it, but it just doesn't have any effect. It's hard to even tell that it's on. And when we look at the shot itself, there's no intentionality into what we want this shot to look like. It looks just fairly bland, no really mood or texture provided by that practical. So the first thing we can do in order to lower the levels is turn off that 360 light, the main light that I'm using to flood the room. So by turning that off, we now have a little bit more of a directional light, right? It's all coming from that window, a little bit from that practical, but it's creating something that at least has some texture, just because we have that gradient from, the window to all the infinity black on the edge of the frame. Same here, right? We have a little bit of a gradient here, and it just creating that texture a little bit. And so when we look at the actual shot, it's better, right? Because now we have motivated lighting, like I'm lit where I'm supposed to, coming from the window, but I'm not selling that practical. That practical is still not really playing a factor in the overall look. Whether I turn that light on or off, we would have basically the same result. So we can take it one step further. If we go to the camera settings, you can see that I added a lot of ND filter just to lower the levels in the room. And now if you look at the practical itself, we can actually see the light bulb a lot more. It's not just drowned in the brightness of that practical. And so it gives this illusion, this feel that it's actually illuminating this scene. One thing we can do here to help is to adjust our white balance in camera. You can see that right now our white balance is set to 5100 Kelvin, which matches the color temperature of that particular light bulb. But if I adjust the white balance in my camera, then I can add a lot more warmth. And so you can dial that until you feel comfortable with the level of warmth in your picture. So at 7400 Kelvin, then I end up with a shot that looks like this. And now I made my practical look a lot warmer. The whole image is starting to feel a lot warmer, and we still have this directional lighting, and we sold the practical a little bit. The last thing we can do here is turn on our overall light to raise the levels if we want a little bit on the back, so that we're not completely crushing the blacks. Now ideally, you would have some level of control, and a simple aperture light bulb, for example, can be pretty helpful. It's not going to solve every problem, but I carry one with me. I only carry one. I only have room for one. And it comes pretty handy when I need to have better control over a practical. So in this example now, I'm going to replace the light bulb over the kitchen sink with the aperture light bulb, where I can control intensity and color temperature. The reality is I have to keep it at 100%. They're not very, very bright. And so most of the time when I use them, they're at 100% brightness. But the fact that I can control the color temperature makes a big difference. Now, I didn't change any of the camera settings. They remain the same. All I'm going to do is replace the light bulb with the aperture light bulb and set it to a warmer tone. And we can see right away that it has those warmer feel already showing on the subject. In this example, I also have access to an ND net, and that's a mesh net that cuts the amount of light that I can just tape on the outside of the window, and it will reduce the intensity of that window. I tried a silk. I didn't like the silk simply because, I need to see through the window like we can see here. And by placing a silk, it just became all white and it just didn't look very natural. But the ND net, it just lets you still see through the window. It just cuts the amount of light coming in, and that made a big difference. I also move the light to the outside, turn the color temperature to 3200 Kelvin, raise the light so that it would give me a downward angle for that light so that it matches kind of the practical. We don't want the light to be shining directly straight towards the subject, or else it would create shadows that look very unnatural. But by doing that, then I'm able to control the levels and the color on my subject and give this illusion again of this practical being the one controlling the levels in the scene and controlling the light on my subject. So the last step was to add an extra light into the room so that I can raise the levels overall into an area like where I'm comfortable, like what I want the picture to look like. Using practicals can do more than add visual interest. They can establish mood, guide the viewer's eyes, and provide the foundation for every lighting decision that follows. By lowering the overall levels, you can gain control over the practicals. And once you control the practicals, you gain control over the mood, the depth, and ultimately the story your image is telling. If you found this video useful, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more cinematography tips and technique. And if you'd like to take greater control over your camera and create better images, check out my online course, Essential Camera Settings. Thanks for watching and happy filming.